Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a delayed moderator, so we will just start with a brief introduction of the panel. I can start with myself. My name is Noen. I'm the Executive Vice President at a company called Deep Sea, working with seabed intervention. We're not currently involved in deep sea minerals, but we have definitely the technology for it and investigating different options on deep sea minerals. So that's basically a bit about me. You want to carry on, Sandor?
Yes. My name is Sandor Muso, and you have to forgive me because I have a very strong accent, but I feel at home here. And I am a marine geologist. I work at the Universidad Austral de Chile in close to Patagonia. I'm a marine geologist, as I said. I work for more than 12 years in two different levels at the International Seabed Authority. Once as a member of the Legal and Technical Commission, and the second one as the director of the Marine Environment and Mineral Resources Management in the International Seabed Authority.
My name is Stein Brunstad Larsen. I'm the COO of Loke Marine Minerals. We are a startup technology company in Norway based in Stavanger, holding 2 licenses for polymetallic nodules in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. And we're getting ready to pursue the opportunities in the Norwegian continental shelf as well. My background is from the oil and gas industry, and as Sander, I also spent some time in Jamaica working for the International Seabed Authority.
All right. Hello, my name is Kaja. I'm actually from Storhaug, so I'm very excited to be in a panel debate where I grew up. I work for the Worldwide Fund for Nature, so WWF. We're one of the biggest global environmental NGOs, and I am the global policy lead for deep sea mining internationally. So I follow the negotiations at the International Seabed Authority, but I'm also the lead in the WWF Norway office on deep sea mining in national waters. So I've been following this closely. I'm a marine biologist, used to work with petroleum management in the Norwegian government, and excited for this conversation.
Hello, my name is Matthew Ritz. I'm a filmmaker, a visual anthropologist by training, and I did a feature film called Deep Rising. I started in 2018 and spent 6 years really digging into the story and get to this film called Deep Rising that stars Sandor as one of the characters and Gerald Barron, the CEO of the metal company, as another character, and Jason Momoa as a lead narration to represent the deep ocean.
And lastly, the presenter. Thank you for getting us started. I think it was perfect that you introduced yourselves. I do want to prepare the ground a little bit for this debate, though, because it's a very particular moment we're in. And this debate is happening now and intensifying. It's been going on for a little while, but it's kind of surfacing from the deep, so to speak. And one of the things that's really peculiar about deep sea mining and the debate surrounding it is that it has to do with 2 almost entirely invisible and to many people unknown things or areas. One is the deep sea and the life forms therein and the minerals. Something we never think about. It's an extremely large area of the planet that is completely hidden. It's down in the dark. It's very hard to know anything about it, and we know actually quite little about what's down there. The other part is minerals and mining and the role they play in our society and how much we depend on them. And this is pivotal to the debate to find out how urgent is the need now and how urgent is it going to be and what are we willing to potentially sacrifice to get more minerals and to get minerals in a way that is safe and so forth. And is it safe? So one of the big questions is, do we know what we are doing? And to know what we are doing, we need a lot of knowledge. And luckily we have this panel, people from different fields coming together who all have a quite solid grip on both sides of the debate and who have the specific knowledges that we need to investigate this problem or this question. Because it's a huge political question, and For those who are not familiar at all with what is at stake and what is the situation, there are, across the vast plains of the deeps around the world, there are these nodules with quite rare metals and some more common metals, and they form over enormous time spans. So they're not like a forest that grows back relatively fast. At some point in history, scientists thought that they would form and reform in 100 years, 200 years. It takes 10 million years, or 20 million years. So in one sense, the question of mining and the question of tapping such resources, it involves our practices and our minds with deep time. And we are already getting involved with deep time. The concept of deep time has to do with the long geological cycles of the planet. It has to do with the Earth systems, and we are already interfering with that. So when we started using petroleum products and burning coals and burning gas and burning oil, we already started interfering with these systems, and we thought we know what we were doing, but not entirely. Not until later. So we can start there, and what is the fields of knowledge that are involved, that we have represented here, is engineering. It's very hard to get down there. You need a lot of machinery, and you need a lot of new technologies, and we don't yet know all the parts of this process, how to do it. We need geology and an understanding of deep sea geology. We need an understanding of mining companies and the mining market and the markets of these rare metals. We need marine biology, extremely essential, because down in the deeps, partly on these nodules, partly around them, there are life forms that we hardly even know anything about. And lastly, we need to communicate with society at large, since this is such an unknown debate. And Mathieu has done just that, and he has also really made an effort to see both sides, not just dive down in the deep, talking about the life forms there, but also talking to the CEOs of mining companies and people analyzing the global market for minerals. So I think we will start with you. What made you sort of craft the film in this way, and how did you do it, and what did you learn along the way?
Yeah, thank you. The interesting thing is actually I started the whole project from a mining perspective, because the first character I met, the first person I met who actually shared the story was Gerald Barron, the CEO of today's metals company. And Gerald Barron became globally actually a symbol. Is not only Gerald Barron doing deep sea bed mining, but he's very good at communication. So, beside maybe some of the other companies really also developing deep sea bed mining, is the one who's been, on the front line from a lot of campaign, NGOs. It's been, without knowing, obviously, in 2018 when I started the project, I couldn't know, all what's coming with him. So I started, getting history in and say like, whoa, okay, this is very, very, very big topic, but, obviously, the aim was not to do a film that promotes deep sea bed mining in his company. So I started looking for another character, a counter character, and when you do storytelling, you need this, this journey with the narrative. And I met with Sander, who was a perfect counter character of calling off some of the arguments. But to talk about my personal journey is an interesting one also, because it took me some time actually to really grab the importance of the issue. 2018, Google deep sea bed mining is basically nothing. Now it's becoming mainstream. And then I learned about this, a UN body, something related to the UN, somewhere in Kingston, Jamaica, that was overseeing half of the planet's surface on behalf of the humanity. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And that's really what really kickstarted for me everything, because I went to Jamaica and I started covering those, almost behind closed door. I mean, no journalists almost were there, and listening to this debate from world, leaders. and delegates and ambassadors and everything starting to talk about what are they going to, manage half of the planet's surface. And that's really what's like, okay, this is like a very, very big story, and I really start documenting. So, the whole story is also intertwining the narrative of the industry, the narrative of why we should not do it, and then have the voice of the ocean. But it took me some time actually to really grab the story and to understand, what really was at stake. And one of the very big story here is that we need those metals to power our so-called green revolution. And that's where, after 6 years of working on that film, I came to a conclusion that is actually not true. To produce, we don't need those metals to produce energy, because things are moving so fast, and the battery chemistry and everything is moving so fast that it's not, from my perspective, from the message also we start sharing, is not the truth anymore. So that's where I released the film in 2023 at Sundance, and since then we actually being on a campaign to show the world actually some of the stories behind, so that's what's been quite important work for me.
Yeah, so thank you. That is Deep Rising, that is screening on Sunday here, and it's already screened on NRK, where you can see it. It's called På dypt vann in Norwegian. It's a good title, and it really delves into the deep, and there are many layers to the ocean, obviously, and it gets darker and darker. So you have the twilight zone, you have the midnight zone, and deepest down there's the abyss. It's called the abyss. And a lot of this ocean is outside national jurisdiction, it's outside the national zones, so it is under the high seas or the international waters. And this area is not owned by anyone, and actually the bottom of the ocean in this whole area under the high seas is just called the area. And the organ, or the organization, a UN organization that sort of presides or administrates all of this, is the International Seabed Authority. And we have more than one person here that has worked there, and among them Sandor. So what can you say about your role as a marine geologist, and how is your knowledge as a scientist, how does it work within the organization, and what are the challenges you've been facing?
I think there are some things that we need to put in our mindset to really jump on the subject. Since very young, all of us here, know that the ocean is 70% of our planet, so it's huge. So for many, 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 many decades, the solution to pollution was dilution. Fair mistake. Now we don't know what to do with the microplastic, right? So it was not dilution. Second, why is that? The reason is, if you now think the ocean is liquid, if the ocean is liquid, you put it in volume and you calculate the volume of all the oceans of our planet and compare with the volume of the Earth, the continental Earth, not the continents, the all Earth, taken out of the water, is to compare a basketball ball, everybody play basketball, more or less like this, to everybody play with marbles on the ground, to a tiny little weeny marble, and that's all the ocean. So what does it mean? This tiny little marble keep you and me and all the species alive, and there is no other planet in the universe with that proportion. The reason, what is the challenge for the geologist? Okay, if it is a tiny little weeny volume, why don't we know everything about it? Because it's spread out in 70% of the surface of the Earth, right? What do we need to know to do deep sea mining is the bottom of the seafloor. The International Seabed Authority, it has been sampling the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, which is between California and Hawaii, and there is a fraction on the north and the fraction on the south, that's called Clarion and Clipperton. There are 18 contracts, I think, 19 maybe, and those contracts, they have to go every 2 years or every year to do sampling. So it's one of the area best sample of the world. But the resolution or the granularity of the sampling per square kilometer is ridiculous. It is maybe one sample every 45 square kilometers. You know, I'm talking about, how many of you guys have been in New York? Yeah, right. How many of you have been walking in Central Park? That's 50 square kilometers. So it's to take one sample in Central Park and tell everybody in a paper, in a scientific paper, how many trees do you have? Do you think it's possible? Of course not. It's exactly the same in the deep sea. All the other constructors that I follow when I was there, the granularity they have is between 800 square kilometers to 1,000 square kilometers for one sample. So how we are going to understand scientifically that you're going to screw it up? More. If you are a marine geologist, I have a good friend now, we are two now here. If we have two marine geologists and you ask him, what is the chance for you to go with the boat, which is standing 5 kilometers on the seafloor? You send a wire and you want to sample exactly the same place twice. Impossible. What does it mean that? We will never know what are the rate of changes of every single bloody ecological function that the deep sea is having today. And we want to go to do deep sea mining? That's a huge challenge. And here my friends should know that every mine on the deep sea in the Clarion-Clipperton zone is more or less 3,000 square kilometers scratching. 15 to 20 centimeters of sediments to take these nodules out. The biggest intervention on land of one single mine is Chuquicamata, is where I'm coming from, Chile. And it's only 15 square kilometers, 1.5. I'm talking about 200 times the size. The challenge for the geologists, again, going back to the question, said, how am I going to prove that I'm not going to have any impact? I'm not even talking about biodiversity. I'm talking about all the biogeochemical cycles. Carbonate is the sink of carbonate, the thing that we're producing in the atmosphere. And we're going to steer it back. We're going to leave a sediment layer on the top of the water, which is 20,000 years old. All geopolymers. Which other animal is going to go to colonize that? None. And that has been proved, and that's science. We have at least 19 examples where we have been gone, that's too much, other people went, to scrap the bottom of the seafloor with them mechanically, with a piece of iron, a rod, many places. The last time it was visited, it was 37 years later. The scratches they did 37 years before are exactly the same. There has not changed, no recovery. So we need to think twice to go and intervene in the deep sea. One, because we have no idea the impact. How long does it take? A century maybe? 2 centuries? 3 centuries? To have some sort of a recovery? And the other one, we don't know the function, the ecological function. We don't know what is the rate at the changes that are seen happen in the deep sea because we don't have enough granularity and we don't have enough repetition of the same samples over and over around the ocean. And we are talking about only one area, Clarion-Clipperton zone. That's not the ocean, right?
Right. So that is one small part, but that is where all the licenses would be given if this was to go through. So what we must understand, from my understanding, is that we are at the point where the International Seabed Authority is about to make decisions, and they have a double mandate. They are to keep the deep ocean safe, ecologically, keep it sound, and they are also to decide whether or not it should be mined. So it's a very conflicted organization in that sense. It has this double mandate. But Øystein, you are not unfamiliar with all this. And you've heard all these stories before, and you know Sandor, I know. And you are also exploring, as a part of Loki, marine minerals. You're doing explorations, but also science. So there are mandates that also the mining companies will have to do their research and they will have to meet certain requirements. So what I wonder is, how does this all look from your perspective? Because this debate has become famous for all the protests, but then there's the other side, and they are not blind to these problems, but they have a way of going about it and their own perspective. So we need to hear them out, which you have done, which you have done, and which we all should do. So, so how does it look for you, and where you're standing?
Yeah. So the interesting thing I think about this discussion is that there is this dynamic about the premise. So the premise where we're coming from is that we actually need these minerals. And I think that we see Norway has a critical mineral strategy, the UK, the US, the EU has a critical mineral strategy. We see the International Energy Agency for the second time in a row publishing a report documenting that there is a huge need for these minerals, and that's why they're labeled critical. And I think that talking about battery, most of these things will probably go to batteries, but we're also introducing artificial intelligence. We're developing, one of the UN's sustainable goals is to provide clean and affordable energy to the humankind. So we're going to need electricity grids, we're going to need copper, we're going to need minerals for other things than batteries as well. So dismissing the need for critical minerals because we're going to develop new battery technology, I think is just an easy way out. So we're actually genuinely thinking that we're introducing a sustainable solution, to contribute to the green shift. So ironically, we're really on the same side because we think that we contribute positively to an environmental issue. So that's kind of the premise and the reality that we live in. And going back to the Clarion-Clipperton zone, which, as Sander explained, is this small area midway between Mexico and Hawaii. That is 0.3% of the global oceans, 0.3. And we have 2 licenses there where we do exploration. So currently there is no harvesting of nodules. There is no one yet on the planet that is involved with commercially harvesting nodules because the ISA hasn't given any grants for that yet. So everyone is exploring. We're doing scientific work to plug the knowledge gap because we really need to build an environmental baseline. We need to understand, the life down there, the biomass. We need to know how it behaves and what is living down there and how it would be affected by potential harvesting of nodules. And the ISA, which is a group of 170 member states, basically most of the countries in the UN is a member state to the ISA. And these 170 countries are represented by 36 council members. And the council members are quite agreed that there will be no activity until we have the regulation in place. So everything we do now is scientific exploration work to map the area. And over the past 40 years, there's been over 100 exploration cruises. The industry has spent close to $2 billion mapping this area. So there is a massive work going on to clarify, the environmental conditions before we can start harvesting the nodules. So and obviously there are a lot of other nuances as well. I think that needs to be introduced with regards to the data. And also, to the sediment removal and all these things. So hopefully we'll get there also later in the discussion because there is a massive development in sampling, in cruises down there, and in technology development that will introduce what we believe is a sustainable harvesting of these nodules that basically sit on the seafloor.
Right. So we are going to circle back more in a debate mode after. So I just want everyone to be heard and to get these descriptions. And it's of course a lot of critics are aware and it comes to mind easily that the so-called fallacy of sunken costs. Very literally, you sink your costs in. You spend a lot of money and you want something back for it. And it's a worry that once this train gets moving, it will be very hard to stop it. We don't know. Maybe the regulations are in place, maybe they are strong enough, maybe there are powers and processes that are harder to control and less visible. We don't know. But I think it's very important to have an open conversation and to have a level of trust so that people can be heard and so that accountability can be built in to whatever processes there are. Now, in deep sea, where you work, Rune, it's you're developing technologies to explore the deep, and it's not like we can just go down there and rake them up. It takes quite a lot. What can you say about how you develop technologies and what you're aiming for, and how similar is it to the scraping of the bottom that Sandor describes that they did for samples, and is there any way to avoid it?
Yeah, good question. So developing technology. So for now, we work quite a lot within renewables and offshore oil and gas. The operational areas on water depths is from a few meters down to, let's say, a few thousand meters. Beyond that, there is rarely anything operational on those kind of industries. So technology-wise, of course, the hydrostatic pressure, the weight of water as you go deeper is quite intense, so it requires quite a lot of the equipment. But the technology is there. We have been at the Mariana pit that is 11,000 meters deep, so there are no big hurdles besides cost and time to actually make equipment. As we saw, for those of you who have already seen the movie from Mathieu, we have this big machine. So one point of view is that it's a beautiful machine because there's a lot of technology and fascinating in one end, but I also got some association with the movie Avatar, where you have these machines tearing down the rainforest and everything. So it's really a dualistic perspective on this technology, because as an engineer we tend to dive down in our little bubble and see how can I solve this problem technically, not what will impact the surroundings, for example. And I worked more than 10 years in a company called Oceaneering, one of the world leading robotics companies, subsea, and every time we have an operation, you sometimes see a fish swimming by or some whale, and it's quite cool, but you don't sort of digest, because you focus on doing the job. Maybe you have some issues. You need to get the robotics back on deck to make some repairs, and they go down again. But of course, you have this vast area around you that doesn't sort of affect you the same way, because you can't see beyond just a few meters. So we have sonars, of course, that we can see in some fancy green pictures and such, but it's more for mapping. But yeah, I think the perception is tricky, and when it comes to you also asked about the impact. So I did a little calculation earlier on just to see the different impacts we have, because I think, frankly, we don't care that much on surface either. One thing is subsea, but also surface. So many of you know Repparfjorden, the issues around the Repparfjorden. And for comparison, when we drill an offshore well for oil and gas, we have maybe 500 to 700 tons of drill cuttings, as they're called, rocks from the drilled seabed. And the amount of deposits from Repparfjorden equals about 30,000 oil wells. So it's a massive amount of deposits just for this one project to have a mine that it will extract. And we have some protests, but we don't. It doesn't turn the society around. So no, I think it's a really important discussion to see the need versus the impact. So yeah.
Yeah, so what we are talking about here is the principle of precaution, which runs deep in our time, because we are facing not just some decades of environmental concerns, but centuries, potentially. But of course, there is the idea that you cannot make an omelette without breaking some eggs and so forth. There is a certain sacrifice, especially with mining. It's very hard to do it extremely clean. Sometimes perhaps you can do it, but there are some concerns that come with it. Now, Helen Scales, who wrote the book The Brilliant Abyss and also wrote part of the script for Deep Rising, I had a conversation with her, and she kind of sketched out what she was worrying about. And what she was worrying about was that once you get started, you will have these machines down in the deep working 24/7, pretty much. They need to be going on and collect, and they would funnel the nodules up to the surface. But they would make a lot of noise. They would affect the mineral market. They would affect our dependency on these minerals, getting them for that price, and you would get a society that needs deep sea mining constantly. And from that point on, it would be like a gold rush, maybe stretching over a century, maybe just some decades, maybe several centuries. There's enough sea bottom for that. So how would we make sure we stop? And then, being a marine biologist like you are, Kaya, she's also concerned with these beings on the bottom, whose world this is, after all. This territory is the territory of someone. It's a world down there that kind of belongs to the denizens or the residents of the deep sea. And there is a problem, I think, with the language we're using. We're not used to think of these beings or these animals being significant at all, even though we might admire them, curious about them. That is, after all, not how we treat the land. We do exploit it, we do use it, we do take up space. So this is now moving to the ocean, and we tend to call it the frontier. It's a new frontier, and for those who are familiar with history, the frontier also is a concept with a kind of sinister side. It's the unregulated, and it is where you can take and extract and then move on. That is what the frontier has been historically. So in opening this new frontier, there's a lot of debate about the deep sea under the high seas, that is international waters, but we have had things happening in Norway where there's been a politically decisions opening up for mining in Norwegian waters. And so now we're at the point where this debate is intensifying here, and you've been a big part of that through the World Wildlife Fund and as someone with experience from the International Seabed Authority and as a biologist. So how does it look from your point of view, and possibly also from the point of view of these beings that are down there?
So I think one of the things with listening to my fellow panelists that I think everyone can agree on is that the deep sea is a very curious an exciting place to explore, and that everyone maybe has this sense of wanting to explore and find out what's down there. And then from there, it's a different road of how we got it. So I actually started being interested in the deep sea when I was quite young. First, I started being interested in space, and then I realized there is this whole unmapped area of the world, on the planet that we live on, which is the deep sea. And about 90% of the deep sea is totally undescribed. So it's kind of like the last wilderness. And when you start to dive down here into this, if you look at, Sandra, you compared the volumes, but if you look at the average height on land, it's about like 500 meters if you flatten everything out. If you look at the average depth of the oceans, it's 3,700 meters. So it's really quite difficult, I think, for us humans to fathom how you live at 11,000 meters below the surface. And it also means that when you go down to these areas, the beings that live there and the creatures that you meet are like sci-fi. There are my favorite fish called the barrel-head fish, or skjellehodefisken, which I've named it in Norwegian because it didn't have a name. Has a jello head with a transparent blue sphere, and it has these circular eyes that it can move around, and it's some pretty badass stuff that lives in the deep sea. But it also means that every time we do a scientific cruise or we go down to the deep sea, we discover new species. And it means that our understanding of how our impact is in these areas is very, 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 very small. And I can try to maybe compare it to, we all live in Norway, or many of you, and we have probably all walked in the forest at different seasons. You've been into the forest in winter and in summer and in spring and in fall. And you meet kind of different creatures. It looks different. In summer, you have flowers going. There's maybe some insects, maybe some wasps, annoying insects, mosquitoes. But then in winter, you get, maybe not in Stavanger so much snow, but sometimes there is some snow. And things change. And that also means that when you have activities in these areas, it changes. And also there has been a lot of things in the news now about insects disappearing and how important insects are. When it comes to the deep sea, we don't even know what the seasons are. And we have not even begun to describe the big stuff. Like, we don't know like what the big stuff is. So even understanding, if you go down with technology, are you looking at an octopus or a fish or a coral? You have no idea. And then I think it's also quite interesting, this idea that the deep sea doesn't kind of provide us with anything because it's so far away. But actually the deep sea is hugely important in like oxygen production, nutrient production, circling nutrients all around the globe. It's also really important for carbon storage. It's the biggest carbon sink, but also stuff like the COVID vaccine. It actually has a part from a deep sea sponge. And for instance, new antibiotics. So the deep sea also houses a lot of solutions. So then back to deep sea mining. I came in and started finding out about deep sea mining about 2012 when I was living in Australia, and there was a project in Papua New Guinea kind of popping up. And then I've been following it closely. And Norway has really been quite in the front line of pushing for seabed mining for over a decade. And what I find quite interesting about that is if you ask Norwegians, we had no idea what the government is doing. This has not been like clearly communicated. There was a whole new law that came in 2019. Then there was this opening process. It's all been kind of mysterious. I think the International Seabed Authority, I don't know, Norwegians, how many of you had heard about that before? It's a very like mystical thing. And then about 3 years ago, Norway really started to intensify, and we started an opening process. And what's also important to recognize is that in Norwegian waters, we don't have nodules. It's not these lumps. We have sulfides, which is kind of the easiest way to describe it, and the geologists, please don't arrest me. It's kind of like an underwater volcano, but it's not quite a volcano, but it's kind of, you know, these areas called black smokers as well. It's where life on the planet began, so very unique ecosystems. And there's kind of active ones and inactive ones. And then we have crusts, which are these kind of sediment metal crusts that are glued to seamounts. And seamounts are kind of oases of life in the deep sea as well. They're really important, for instance, for fisheries. So it's a totally different ballgame, actually, talking about Norwegian waters. And then the Norwegian government initiated this process, and they did an impact assessment. And then the impact assessment said, because we don't have information for 99% of the area, we don't know what the impacts will be. And then our government still made the decision to open. And this is, for me, one of the huge issues, because we have committed to the precautionary principle. We have committed to making sure that we understand the impacts before we start activities. And at the moment, the Norwegian government, unfortunately, decided to go and dive blindly into an area that goes all the way up to Svalbard. Like maybe you have heard about Wisting, this is like way further north than Wisting and way further offshore. So I think, from my perspective, deep sea mining, the discussion around it, is not a when or how. It's a should we, and do we need to, and if. And sometimes the debate starts off in the wrong place.
Right. Good. So I think now we're moving into the more debate mode, and some more critical and maybe some opposition. But I do want to hold on to that thought about the beings that live down there and how they look and what it means to discover this unknown world, this science fiction world. Because, well, for one, it's portrayed in Deep Rising, and it's a big part of the storytelling there. The second thing is that we are experiencing a cultural shift where we start thinking differently about nature. It's not a given that nature should only be described as resources, even though it has that function economically. That is one language. But we are also opening up other ways of talking about it, so that it's not so obvious to us that the Amazon rainforest, for instance, is just a bunch of resources that wait to be taken out. Even if there is in the World Economic Forum and other places, there is a term that is called underexploited that is still being bounced around. So if something is there and it's not taken, it's underexploited. So, but I want to ask you about the film and a little bit about how you obtained this footage and which effect it has had on people and how you use it in your storytelling and what it means.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a challenging journey to find all this, because it's not like, it's not like we as a filmmaker and the producer had the budget to organize the footage, the shoots, and
You're not James Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, but even James Cameron, I mean, he did some submarine dive mostly from himself, as an exploit, but which, it's very interesting because, again, you just mentioned it with Avatar, but also there's, very mainstream stories that getting out now, opening up this, last frontier to people. Actually, another one is Black Panthers #2, where it's like they actually use some of the design of Nautilus machine, and it's the same kind of story, narrative. And so, there's two very important things. Is one, as a filmmaker, my role is to create empathy and to create emotion, because this is the power of art and filmmaking, is to bring something as obscure and unknown as a deep sea floor at a few 6,000 kilometers, and now then using score, narration, working a lot on the footage, have people go through a journey and feel something. Because if you create empathy, then you can move people, and when you move people, you can create action or debate or whatever it is. But I think also fundamentally, it's a question of storytelling, and what I'm hearing here is a story that is, from my perspective, flawed at the first place. And this story we've been repeating, and that's, I think, a very important scene in Deep Rising. For some, haven't seen it, is also playing on Sunday, is the transition from when we saw that, we can kill all the whales to extract the oil to create power. We were lighting the streets in Europe with oil from the whales, which today we look at back, it's like, that was crazy. And somehow oil and gas came as a replacement, and people were celebrating this. We're like, wow, we found a sustainable solution. Now we have this incredible form of life that was fossilized, million years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, full of power, and they're gonna, stop the slaughter of the whale. And then we create all those needs around. We create plastic, we create whatever. I mean, and don't get me wrong, it creates our civilization also. But now we realize, like, no, we have to find, and from my perspective, the exactly same narrative. We're going after finite resources that might solve another problem and creating so many more after. And that's what is worrying me. And as a storyteller, I'm like, okay, we need to tell that story, and maybe we need to change the story. And the change is actually already changing in a way, like I've been listening to the debate, and I'm like, okay, 4 years ago, everything was about EVs. And all the graphs were showing how many EVs, how many Tesla, how many Volkswagen, how many whatever will be put on the market. This is the curve of nickel, how much nickel and cobalt we need by 2030. But this story is already done, because lithium iron phosphate batteries, which have no drop of nickel or cobalt in it, they're taking by storm the market. And Volkswagen and Volvo and a lot of even Tesla now are bringing those batteries in. So all of a sudden the narrative of like, oh, we need to get all this nickel and now we're going to get it, it's over. Oh, so we need to get all this rare earth for like, okay, maybe military purposes, maybe for the CPU, for AI, maybe for the computing. But fundamentally, like again, it's the same story with plastic, same story with the extractive industry. We're creating new needs to justify the means of actually getting after those rare earths. We still need it, but we have to ask ourselves the fundamental question: how much we need? Is this enough already dug out? Can we recycle? Can we reuse? Can we just do all and maybe replace some of it before actually starting a whole new industry that's going to cost billions and billions of dollars? With all the questions we're asking here.
Good. This is the crucial question, whether or not there is necessity, because that is a crucial part of the argument, to go down there. And it's very hard to settle, I think, because necessity is hardly ever absolute unless you're attacked with a knife and you either have to fight or run. Sometimes we're under pressure, and sometimes there are other options that are under debated. But at the same time, there is a section of your film where you talk about geopolitics, which is basically a term for the competitive state of the world between different blocks and units and countries and zones of influence. And well, it's hard not to think of China and the way we depend on Chinese minerals and so forth. And in preparing this talk, I've talked to Øystein about this because it's interesting also. Once you get to geopolitics, you're very close to security, national security issues. And that is a part of our politics that is not really accessible democratically. We don't vote if we should buy another warship, hardly ever, or if we should send some spies somewhere. Someone else is dealing with that. So you feel that there's something going on where there are concerns over our vulnerability as a democracy, or the vulnerability of Europe and so forth. And these arguments are operating a little bit in the background. So can you say anything about our dependency on minerals from China and whether or not that is a crucial part of the arguments that support the exploration?
Yeah, sure. So the amount of minerals, coming, belonging to China is not huge, but China completely dominant, the value chain, and they basically have all the processing capabilities in the world. So, and they've been over time spending billions of dollars buying up mines in Australia, in Chile, and in Congo, Indonesia. So they completely control the cobalt and the nickel market, and they also completely control the processing, and that includes rare earth minerals. So that is really we have to look at this, through three avenues. We have the environmental aspect, we have a social aspect, and we certainly have a geopolitical aspect, which is important, and that's why we see this increased interest from the US now, that we need to balance this total dominance out. And China has already used their market dominance to withhold critical minerals to the market in the trade war. So we see that they are willing to use this tool to stop others from obtaining these critical minerals.
So they tweaked their buttons a little bit just to see what happened.
They just stopped selling it. They have all the supply, and it's too easy to say the Western world, but let's just call it the Western world. They don't get it.
So what was the immediate effect when that happened?
Well, it restrains space technology, military technology, but also the wind turbines that are sophisticated magnets in wind turbines, which depends on rare earth minerals. You have solar panel, you have mobile phones. We all use fragments of rare earth minerals in all these technologies, and again, China completely dominates that end of the supply chain. So it's a factor, but I mean, how are we going to weigh that against the environmental requirements and also the social aspect? It's a very difficult discussion, but it's a factor, and it's a fact.
Yes. Do you have any comments to that, Sandor? Yes.
I don't take it wrong, please. But that narrative is over and over and over and over and over everywhere. Everywhere, China, since Trump, But we made it. Why? Because we didn't want to do the dirty job. Remember, mining is not to collect the nodules or the rock. We need the elements which are inside the rock, right? I cannot have a rock. I have copper, yeah, but you have 2 atoms of copper in this rock, and I need those 2 atoms of copper. So I need to do metallurgic, right? We didn't want to do the rare earth mineral here in Svalbard or here in Oslo or here in Stavanger. Let the Chinese do it. And that's what we did. When the Chinese realized, you want to have an iPhone and you want to listen music. Remember, people that my age here, the big speaker that we are using, the one like this. In the back, it has a huge bobine and magnets to reproduce the sound. Now, do you have a phone? Anybody has a phone? Yeah. Here I have the same quality. How can I do that? I still need the magnet. That's where the rare earth minerals are. Dysprosium, neodymium, those are the same element. But we didn't want to do the dirty job. We let the Chinese do it. The Chinese, they're not stupid, they're like us, right? They understood the process, they improved the effectiveness, the efficiency, and now they say, oh, you want to have iPhone. Actually, all the iPhone were done in China. Is the Chinese who forced Apple to do it in China? Nah. It was the Apple company who goes there. Why? Because it's cheaper labor. So you see, you guys in the private sector, they always tell the story from your side, but you don't tell the whole story to the public, and the public get confused, right? So we make China to do all this rare earth mineral, and today we need them, supposedly we need them, to solve a problem that everybody talk and society is asking. Who are the guilty? Chinese or us? It's us. Thank you.
Very good.
But my point is, the point I want to bring here is, I heard a little baby crying. Is he still around? Too bad. You need to tell the story to him or her. The question we need to ask, as Matthew and Kaya mentioned, do I have the right to take all those nodules who grow 10 to 20 million years old, and the future generation will not have a chance to even to look at it? All the minerals, let's say all the goods that they are in the area, that's mean all the seafloor, all the water that is beyond national jurisdiction, has been decided in 1967 by Arvid Pardo as the common heritage of humankind. What the hell does it mean that? What it means that all those goods, all those beauty, all the species that you have belongs to you, to you, to you, to me, but at the same time to no one, because it is the source of treasure for the future generations. Do we have the right to take it and not give the chance to the great, 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 great sons and daughters that you all want to have? So for me, it's a geoethical issue. It's not economic. It is not economy, stupid. It is the planet Earth, stupid. I talked about this morning. That was the phrase, the first one. It is the economy, stupid, was James Carville, who was the head of the campaign of Bill Clinton, and he won the election because of that sentence. But today we are realizing, after the rising, and all the people that are here, I'm sure, we all share the same view, it is the planet, stupid. It's not the economy. Why? Because we want to give the chance to that little one there to enjoy the planet that we are enjoying now. Or do you want to have a notion that after 15 minutes you have to tell to your great-grandson you have to get out, otherwise you start burning?
We will see. It's a situation where compromise is suggested everywhere. And where compromise also feels like a very dangerous road to take and dangerous word. So I'm wondering, like in the Norwegian picture, you wanted to say something, and I suppose you want to say something about the situation in Norway now and the debates around it, or maybe something else. But it's your turn to talk, and then after to Rune.
Well, I had, the more I listen to my fellow, of course, many things that I want to say, but I will try to limit myself as we are not, we don't have an infinite amount of time. But first of all, just to bring back this point of processing, I think it's just very important that discussing whether or not to mine this deep sea actually doesn't have something to do about whether or not we build processing facilities. That's something we have to discuss in a different context. And like you're saying, Øystein, the processing of minerals and the processing, that does not happen in the deep sea, that happens on land. And interestingly, was something the Norwegian government chose to exclude from the impact assessment. So when Norway was looking at whether or not to do deep sea mining, they have not looked at processing, they have not even looked at if it's possible to process the minerals, and they have not looked at where they would do it or what they would do it. And processing also comes with a number of environmental concerns and social concerns. So I think it's an important debate, but it doesn't answer the question about deep sea mining, which is about the mining. And then I think the point that Sander has about, the current and future generations, which is what the United Nations Law of the Sea mandates, which is the foundation of the entire discussion we're having in the International Seabed Authority, it's a very important one because it means that the activities that you choose to do now has to benefit future generations. Not just not harm, but it has to benefit. And that's a very long-term perspective to bring in. And then there is another point, which is about the precautionary principle, which is also mandated in the United Nations Law of the Sea, and is also mandated from Norway to follow. And that basically states, excuse my language, if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know like what's going to happen, then you should just not do it. Like you stop and you pause and you wait. And if you don't know the consequences of your action, if you then go ahead and do it anyway, shit might hit the fan. So, make sure that you understand the consequences and what will actually happen before you start taking an action. And this is the massive problem with deep sea mining, because all of the science that's been done, the independent science, is telling us we do not at the current moment have the knowledge to be able to assess that. And actually it's indicating things like restoration is impossible. If it's possible, it would cost more than the global defense budget. Like it's these incredible numbers. So I think that's also something in the world of geopolitics and all the other debates. The precautionary principle is like a foundation that we built our society on, and that needs to be upheld. And we need to remember that. Thank you.
Bravo. I think it remains an open question, though, if we built our society on the precautionary principle. It seems more like a wild experiment sometimes. But that is also innovation. I don't know if you wanted to speak to the question of innovation in mining. We were touching on technologies and how they change at some point. But I want to ask you that, because you say we already have the technologies. And everything we talk about when it comes to the environmental costs of mining and so forth has to do with the current state of the technology. Do you see any way that technology could drastically change, or are these givens, the environmental damage and whatever there is that comes with potentially mining nodules and other deep sea minerals?
Yeah, so as you said, Kai, it's quite different from the Pacific Sea with regards to the North Sea, how we're going to extract seabed minerals. So even though if you have some magic magnets just to lift stuff up, there still will be impacts. So from my point, it was more of a, like you mentioned, this requirement for different metals and minerals. It's still there, So when we work after business cases. That's sort of why we wake up in the morning, unfortunately. But these business cases are somewhat limited in what we assess. So we see on profitability, how long time can we pay off the equipment, etc. But like if you look at EU now with pushing the green shift, they have the EU Green Deal that's going to make the EU net zero in 2050. There was a presentation at last year's Skagen-konferanse who discussed a bit on the actual possibility of doing this, and he said it's virtually impossible to reach those targets. You need about, I think it was 19,000 mines or something to have enough metals and minerals, so it's just not possible to get there if everyone just going to convert into electric instead of changing the way we behave. So what the EU has done is they established this Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD. I think it's a quite significant step in the right direction, but it's still a lot up to independent how they would like to do this, because one of the regulations there is the ESRS E4 that says you need to know how much you impact biodiversity and ecosystems when you do some activities. And I challenged Ernst & Young, now EY, and Deloitte. We discussed this on a bit, and it's a lot up to the companies themselves to how much in depth do you want to go. So of course, if we're going to do the ESRS E4, we might say, well, we didn't damage any whales, we didn't dent any stuff around. That's could be enough, but I think the EU is pushing, but it's up to different companies to be pushing the boundaries. So everyone just relaxes in the chair. We're not going to get there, but if some pushes a bit more than the other, I think there will be more companies sort of competing on environmental issues as well, not just the financial.
Right. So we all know the Norwegian adage or saying about the goat that watches the oats. And there's this whole idea that, well, is there accountability if these companies are also the ones doing the science to find out if it's responsible? So the question is, do we have a baseline, not just for the ecosystems, but a moral baseline, where do we know at which point we could say, oh yeah, it's all right, we can do it? Do we know? And who draws that line, and what would it consist of? And I want answers maybe from the both of you, from Kaja and from Øystein, on that.
Yeah, so we've been doing environmental work in the CCZ, in the Cladding-Clipperton Zone, since 2013. And we will continue to do that for another few years. So we're going to have more than 15 years of data available for that small area. And we're working with scientific institutions like the National Oceanographic Centre in Southampton, the National History Museum in London. We're working with NORS here in Norway. We're associated with universities in Leeds and Newcastle and Florida. And I think that no one really believes that we have these institutions in our pocket. We're not talking about corrupt scientists. I believe these are recognized institutions, that develop independent science. So I don't think there's any need to doubt the results of what they're saying. But we do need more information, and we need to spend more time developing, plugging the gaps. And we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to do exploration cruises, and we're going to continue to build the database. And when we get to a point where we can start testing the equipment, we need to build, as you would know, a huge monitoring plan, and we need to deploy instrument and autonomous vessels circling around, continuously monitoring. And this is something that needs to continue for months and months on. And we are committed. When we go into production, it's going to be years, and it's going to be continuous. So we're building really a robust knowledge of what's going to happen in the area that is affected, and this is just an effort that's going to continue on. And also we're talking about mining, but if we go back to the concept of the nodules, they're sitting on the seabed, on the floor of the seabed, and there is this kind of mushy, yogurt-ish sediment layer on top. So we're not talking about mining. We're not talking about digging holes in the ground. We're not talking about investing in infrastructure or pipes that's going to sit there. We're talking about collecting stones from the seabed, and then we leave the seabed, obviously, without these stones, very much compared to what we do with the oil. The oil has also formed over millions of years, and we're sucking up the oil. It's going to be another million years, if ever, there's going to come oil back. So it's very comparable to the industry that we're currently using to fuel the global energy need.
The industry we have to move away.
Yeah. Well, the oil is similar in some ways, different in some ways. It's comparable to a certain extent. But I'm wondering, are there mechanisms in place that guarantee that the scientists you employ to find this out and that says, don't do it, will not be fired?
No.
Sandor told me this quite hilarious story about a Polish investigation of the seafloor where they listed all the species they had found, and among them were some amphibians down at 4,000 meters. And he was very curious as to how they found amphibians down at 4,000 meters. And they could inform him that, oh, this was a mistake, and that part of the list disappeared. So we need to be aware of accountability, of course, and of course, big trusted institutions are part of that and important. But what is your experience, Kaja, with that part of it?
Yes, so just before I jump into that, just one short comment to what was said here about the EU, because the EU is one of the closest trade partners of Norway, and have actually expressed a very strong opinion on deep sea mining. The European Investment Bank has excluded it from all of its investments due to climate and environmental impacts, and the European Parliament has called for a moratorium, so a temporary ban twice, including also in a recent resolution against the Norwegian opening decision. And the European Commission has said they want to prohibit deep sea mining until the scientific standards are understood, and you can prevent all harmful effects from the activity, which, at the moment is impossible. So I think that's just important to remember that the EU is not interested in deep sea minerals. So when we're talking in Norway about the EU and minerals, this is actually land-based minerals that we are discussing. And then about the science. Actually, there's been a very interesting court ruling in the Dutch court that talked about science, and this science that was done in the contractors in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. And I will just start by saying that I also don't dispute that a lot of the scientists that are there are really, really excellent scientists. However, as we maybe all know, the answers you get also depend on who defines the questions and who defines the questions in the impact assessments. And when it's the companies themselves defining the questions that have an economic interest, at least you can ask a question whether or not that will be totally objective, or at least not directing it in some kind of angle. And I think that's just an important aspect to have with it. And in the Dutch court, this was made very clear actually in the ruling that you cannot consider scientific surveys that are done by industry in exploration surveys as independent science, because there is a clear economic incentive for them to find a certain thing. So I think it is extremely important that we have true independent science also in these areas, and that this is mapped independently by independent experts who don't feel any of that economic connection to it. And then the question about also the timeline here of things, because there was a paper that came out a couple of years ago looking at the knowledge gaps, because there are many, but also trying to outline what information do we need to make a scientific, effective management, to be able to make a decision. Because this is a question that we get posed with a lot. Okay, when do you have enough knowledge? Scientists will always want to go out, they'll always want to map more. And this actually looked at the 3 resource types and mapped it out and said that we're at least 10, 15, 20 years away from being able to assess those types of activities. So then it's not actually a question of when Øystein can do test mining, it's if Øystein can do test mining, and we need to have those proper baselines in place. And then just also to add that the ISA does not just control the Clarion-Clipperton zone. So if you start mining, there is no way that will only happen in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. It controls 50% of the seabed of the planet, 50% of our planet, and there can be licenses given in all of those areas. So we need to also remember that.
Yeah, I will listen. I promise. We're nearing the end. I just wanted to ask you about one argument that is made in the film. At the very end, Baron of the metals company argues that we have now changed our strategy. We're going to do something different. We're going to just do it as a transition. We're going to do it for a little bit, just a little while, and then we will stop. What do you have to say about this argument, and whatever else you have to say?
It's actually linked to a comment I just wanted to reply to the narrative of seeing those nature as commodities, and I think this is a really big mistake we still own. And actually, I respect the fact you actually saying yourself we still is the same industry. This is the oil industry, is the same mentality that see things as commodities, and it really depends on the story you tell. Because for me, they're not rock. There's not rock. Sandor is telling about it. It's 20 million years to grow. It's growing. A rock is not growing. It's something living. It's a living. It's full of microorganisms, and it's the same mentality that see an old-grown tree in a forest as wood you can cut and sell. No, an old-grown tree is actually a living being. Is a living being and make us all alive. So it's also, for me, this really big problem we're in terms of the paradigm we're living in right now of seeing all those things as dead thing, commodities. You can trade, put in the market, put it in Wall Street. It's just like, and it goes up and down, and you make money, you lose money, but we forget this very, very, very important thing. And I think it's like we can. So that's why, I really try to share also with Deep Rising. We mistaking the transition right now because it's not. We are in a sustainable growth paradigm. We still want to grow, and instead of really rethinking ourselves as part of this big living being with planet Earth. And as long as we don't change that, yes, we're gonna see dead rock that you can just pick and collect, and it doesn't really matter because we need this nickel. And that's a very deep mentality. And to the question, yes, that's really kind of the last scene. One of the last scenes of Deep Rising is like, again, we're gonna destroy ecosystem. We're gonna collect things. We're gonna cut trees until we have enough. But That's what is shown in the film, and what we showing. Like if we don't change, we will never have enough. So it's just like it's capitalism as this base where you create value on finite resources. You can collect or cut or exploit to a point where you're reaching a limit, and as you said before, move to the next frontier and keep on doing. So it's a fundamental paradigm we need to change. It's go even beyond deep sea bed mining here. It's like how we see ourselves as human beings with our Mother Earth.
Right. Thank you. So where are we with time? I've parked my phone for filming. We're well over. So, all right, that will have to be the last word, but the discussion is ongoing. So I encourage everyone to follow it in the news and to spread this story, because it's happening unbeknown to most of us. And it's a very decisive period.
And spread the documentary.
Spread the documentary. Watch it. Yes. Wonderful. And it's on NRK, so you can recommend it to anyone and they can find it and stream it. And thank you for being sporty to be here and talk about the mining industry from that point of view. There's been a lot of criticism, so that's really brave of you. And thank you for sharing different thoughts and for being in dialogue with each other constantly. So that is extremely important, most important thing of all. So thank you all. Thanks for being here.